Chapter 15. Packing List. The expedition, Halden explained, would be small and deliberately quiet. No fanfare, no formal guild announcement, just a controlled excursion into the deep second ring with enough combat support to pull Kael out if something went wrong. Joran was coming. So was a guild-contracted ranger Kael hadn't met yet, a woman named Tamsin Vale, who arrived at the outpost 2 days later with a longbow, a limp she didn't explain, and a reputation, according to Denner, as one of maybe 4 people alive who's gone past the second ring and come back with a story instead of a body count. "You're the Inventor," Tamsin said, sizing him up in the outpost yard with the flat, assessing look of someone who'd outlived several better-equipped people. "Halden's file called you a machinist. Guild registry doesn't have a machinist. Mellow Kael and how this interesting people are." She didn't ask for the rest of it, which Kael appreciated more than he could say. "You keep close to Joran. You don't wander off the marked line for material scavenging, no matter how good it smells, to whatever it is you do. And if I say run, you ask questions after, not during. Same rules as the first ring. Higher stakes." "Sounds familiar," Kael said, and did not mention that the last time someone had given him those exact instructions, a rift had opened in the middle of Miller's Field regardless. Ren, predictably, wanted to come, and was, with equal predictability, told no by roughly everyone with the authority to tell her no. A decision she accepted with all the grace of someone filing a formal, ongoing protest. "I could carry supplies," she said, for the 4th time, watching Kael pack a satchel of scrap and wire at the scrapyard workbench. "You could get eaten. I could carry supplies while getting eaten. Multitasking." "Ren, fine." She flopped dramatically onto the workbench, narrowly avoiding a half-finished construct, and pointed an accusing finger at it. "But you're naming that one something that isn't Scuttle. I mean it this time. It deserves better. It's Scuttle. It's the 23rd Scuttle, Kael. At some point, that stops being a name and starts being a diagnosis." Kael was still composing a defense of his naming conventions. He had one ready, involving efficiency and branding consistency, neither of which Ashen had found remotely convincing when he'd tried it out loud that morning. When Seraphine arrived at the scrapyard gate, dressed for travel rather than court, a satchel of her own already slung over one shoulder, "I heard about the expedition," she said, before anyone could ask, in the flat, preempting tone of someone who had already anticipated every objection and prepared a counter for each. "I'm an E-rank wind mage with 2 years of field training and a father who governs this district, which means I can either come along as useful reconnaissance support, or I can simply follow the expedition on my own 30 minutes behind it, much less safely. I'd rather you pick the option where I'm actually helpful." Tamsin, arriving in time to catch the last half of that, looked Seraphine up and down with something that might have been approval. "House Alcarn's girl. Lady Seraphine, if we're being formal. Seraphine, if we're not. Can you actually fly reconnaissance, or is that a claim?" "Ask me again once we're in the second ring," Seraphine said, "and I'll show you instead of telling you." And something in the exchange. Brisk, unsentimental, 2 competent people sizing each other up without wasting time on pleasantries. Settled a question Halden hadn't gotten around to asking yet. "Operator," Ashen noted. Dry as ever, as Kael watched his supply list quietly grow by one more name. "Your expedition roster has expanded in a direction I did not model. Recommend updating contingency planning accordingly." You could have mentioned that before she showed up with a satchel already packed. "I did not know either." She is, if it is any consolation, an excellent addition. Her wind affinity provides genuine tactical value your current construct portfolio lacks entirely. Kael looked around the scrapyard, Ren sulking on the workbench, Tamsin and Seraphine already deep in some clipped, professional exchange about terrain, Fen quietly reinforcing the straps on his travel pack without being asked, and felt, underneath the nerves, something that had been in genuinely short supply for most of his life. He felt like he had people. They left for the Ashwood Deep's edge at first light. Chapter 16. The Second Ring. The first ring, Kael had learned months ago, was a boundary. Patrolled, mapped, dangerous but known. The second ring was something else entirely. The trees grew closer together here, old enough that their roots had buckled the ground into a maze of hollows and ridges, and the light that made it through the canopy came in thin, sickly shafts that made everything look slightly wrong. Like a room remembered instead of a room actually seen. Nobody's fully mapped past here, Tamsin said, low, leading them along a trail that was less a trail and more a suggestion. Second ring shifts. Beasts push the boundary in and out, depending on what's breeding, what's dying, what's come through a fresh rift recently. Guild keeps loose estimates. That's it. Comforting, Kael muttered. Wasn't trying to comfort you, Seraphine, walking a few paces ahead with her eyes half closed, one hand raised at shoulder height, had spent the last 20 minutes doing something Kael didn't have a name for. Reading the air currents, she'd explained. When he asked, feeling for disturbances that meant something large enough to matter was moving through the canopy above them. It was, he had to admit, far more elegant than anything he could currently do. And he found himself quietly cataloging the way she worked, the same way he cataloged everything else interesting. Turning it over, looking for the mechanism. System notification. New environment detected. Ashwood Deep. Second ring. Machine communion range. Significantly degraded. Ambient interference from unmapped rift residue is disrupting fine detail sensing. Recommend reliance on conventional senses in addition to communion. That's new, Kael said, feeling the sudden static fuzz of his usual awareness go patchy and unreliable, like trying to listen to a familiar voice through a wall of rain. Confirmed. This zone carries substantially higher ambient aether density than the first ring. Recommend caution. Reduced sensing range means reduced warning time. They found the first sign of it 2 hours in. A scraped, half-buried trail through the undergrowth, wide enough for something much larger than a duskhound, moving in a long, patient loop that circled back on itself twice before continuing deeper. That's not hunting, Joran said, crouched over the trail, frowning. That's patrolling. Tamsin's face had gone carefully blank in the specific way of someone recognizing something she'd hoped not to. Camouflage pattern in the brush disturbance. Long limbs, low gait. She looked up. You said you spotted a bramble stalker in the first ring, months back? Kerrank, Kael said. Joran called it in. It got called in. Then it got tracked and lost 3 separate times over 2 months, moving deeper into the second ring each time instead of retreating like it should have. Tamsin stood, scanning the canopy with new intensity. Hunters who've seen it call it the Long Watcher. Doesn't attack outright. Mostly waits, watches, tests you before it commits, which is worse in some ways than something that just charges. It's supposed to be confined to deep second ring by now. This trail's fresher than that. Meaning it's either gotten bolder, Tamsin said, or it's gotten stronger. Neither one is good news for us specifically. Seraphine's raised hand had gone very still. Something's moving, she said quietly. Above the canopy line, 40 degrees north-northwest. Circling, not approaching. Watching. Every head in the party turned, slow and deliberate, toward the dense green-black tangle of trees to the northwest, where nothing at all appeared to be moving, and everything about the silence said otherwise. Operator, Ashen said, very calm, very focused, in the tone Kael had learned meant this is the part where you need to actually listen. I recommend you begin thinking, right now, about how everything you have built in the last 3 months might function as a team, rather than individually. I suspect you are about to need that answer sooner than planned. Chapter 17. The Long Watcher. It didn't attack for another 20 minutes, and those 20 minutes were, Kael would decide afterward, far worse than the fight itself. They moved in a tight formation through the gloom, Tamsin scanning the canopy, Joran watching the ground-level brush, Seraphine's raised hand never fully lowering. And the whole time Kael could feel it, not through communion, which was still fogged and unreliable this deep in, but through something older and more animal, the specific prickling certainty of being watched by something that had already decided how this was going to go and was simply waiting for the most useful moment to start. It chose the moment they crossed a shallow, exposed stream bed, open ground on both sides, canopy thinning just enough to let real daylight through for the first time in hours. "Down!" Tamsin shouted, and put an arrow through the space where Joran's head had been a half-second earlier, and the Long Watcher hit the stream bed like the forest itself had decided to attack them. It was bigger than Kael remembered from the first ring, easily twice the length it had been months ago, its camouflage hide rippling between the greens and browns of the surrounding brush, so fluidly that even watching it directly, some part of his brain kept trying to unsee it. Long-limbed, low, terrifyingly fast, it drove straight for Joran, the biggest visible threat, and only Tamsin's arrow, catching it mid-flank, threw its charge wide enough for Joran to roll clear. System notification. Beast detected. The Long Watcher. Bramble Stalker, Elder. Estimated rank. C. Upper range. Significant deviation from prior sighting. Rank growth confirmed. Threat level. Severe for current party composition. "Seraphine!" Tamsin shouted, already knocking a second arrow. "Grounded. I can't hit what I can't see clean." Seraphine's hand snapped down, and a compressed gust of wind tore through the stream bed with a force that stripped leaves and loose brush away in a widening ring. And for one crucial half-second, the Long Watcher's camouflage stuttered against bare, wind-scoured stone, fully visible, fully exposed. Tamsin's second arrow took it through the shoulder. It didn't slow down. Kael, heart hammering, dropped to one knee at the stream bed's edge and did the thing Ashen had spent 3 months drilling into him, until it stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like breathing. Reached for the thread of aether in his chest, and instead of one construct, or even a handful, poured everything he had into the largest, most ambitious synthesis he had ever attempted under pressure. Aether reserve will not support full completion. Recommend partial function compromise. Then give me partial function. The stream bed's loose stone and scattered scrap metal debris. 3 months of deep-forged material carried in his satchel for exactly this kind of desperate improvisation, rose and knitted together not into one construct, but a dozen small, crude, half-formed things, snapping and grasping, thrown out in a wide net directly into the Long Watcher's flank as it turned to finish its charge on Tamsin. It wasn't elegant. Half of them fell apart on contact, but enough of them held. Wire and packed stone locking around one long foreleg, a crude spiked shell driving into an already arrow-torn shoulder, to throw the beast's stride into a stumbling, snarling collapse 3 feet short of Tamsin, who put her third arrow directly into its exposed throat at point-blank range. The Long Watcher went down thrashing, camouflage hide flickering uselessly between colors that no longer mattered, and did not get back up. Nobody spoke for a long moment after that, the whole party breathing hard in the sudden ringing quiet of the stream bed, until Joran, checking himself over for injuries with shaking hands, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Alden's going to lose her mind when she reads this report. Operator. The core is destabilizing. Decision required. And I would remind you that your aether reserve is critically low. This is not the same calculation as the Duskhound Alpha. Recommend extreme caution." Kael looked at the pulsing violet crystal forming where the Long Watcher had fallen, then at Tamsin, who was already watching him with the sharp, assessing look of someone who knew exactly what that hesitation meant. "Partial absorption," she said. "Don't be a hero about it. Take what your body can actually hold and walk away from the rest. Dead's not a rank." Kael, for once, listened. Chapter 18. What's Left Standing. System Notification. Core Absorption. The Long Watcher. C rank. Partial, controlled. Significant experience gained. Blueprint synthesis. Tier 1, Tier 2. Machine communion. Tier 1, Tier 2. Class rank reassessed. Machinist, D rank, C rank. Core infusion material acquired. Long Watcher fragment, C grade. Adaptive camouflage properties detected. Recommend reserving for a construct that has earned it. Controlled absorption logged. No backlash. Operator. This is what listening to advice looks like. Please continue doing it. They made it back to the first ring by nightfall, exhausted, half the party favoring some kind of injury, and camped just inside the safer boundary, rather than push all the way back to town in the dark. A decision Tamsin made unilaterally, and nobody argued with, mostly because nobody had the energy left to argue with anything. "You partially absorbed a C-rank core," Joran said, still sounding faintly stunned about it over the fire. "And you're sitting there eating dried apricots like it's a completely normal Tuesday." "Afiam. It's not a normal Tuesday. I'm just very tired." Kael took another apricot anyway, mostly because Seraphine, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, kept passing him the bag every time he stopped eating for more than a minute, in a way that felt less like sharing food and more like quietly making sure he didn't forget to. "You built 12 constructs out of loose gravel and desperation," she said, not quite looking at him, watching the fire instead. "In about 4 seconds. I've spent 2 years training wind affinity, and I still can't manage that kind of improvisation under pressure." "I had good motivation. Extremely large, extremely fast motivation." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make it a joke." She glanced at him then, something unguarded in her expression that the noble poise usually kept carefully hidden. "You almost died today. Several times, from what I could see. I'd like it if you took that seriously for at least one full sentence." Kael considered that, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he could. "It scared me more than the Duskhound Alpha did," he admitted. "The Alpha? I didn't have time to be scared. It just happened. This one I had 20 minutes to think about first." He looked at his own hands, still faintly trembling. "I keep doing the math on how many more of these I can survive before the math stops working in my favor." "That's a real answer," Seraphine said, quietly. "Thank you." Tamsin, from across the fire, did not look up from cleaning her arrows, but did say, dryly, "For what it's worth, kid, that math gets better the stronger you get. Not safer. Better. There's a difference, and it's the only difference that matters out here." Halden met them at the outpost gate the next morning, and read Joran's field report twice through without saying a word, her expression doing something complicated that eventually settled into an expression Kael hadn't seen on her before. Something close to genuine respect. "C rank," she said finally. "Confirmed. Guild witnessed, on the record. Do you have any idea how rare it is for anyone to jump 3 ranks in a single season, let alone an unclassified support-adjacent anomaly with 3 months of active training? Is that a professional observation or a personal one?" "Both," Halden said. "The Capital's going to want you a great deal more than they already did, Rennick, and I want to be honest with you about that before it happens, rather than after." She studied him for a moment, something careful in her expression. "The missing persons file's still open. I've been sitting on formally closing it out of professional courtesy, in case you wanted more time. But eventually, someone above my rank is going to make that decision for you." Kael thought about how Solari, and 15 years of an open inquiry, and a boy in a crater whose name nobody had ever recorded, and felt the familiar tangle of hope and fear and unresolved grief settle back into his chest right where he'd left it. "Not yet," he said, But soon, Halden agreed, and didn't push further, which Kael was, once again, quietly grateful for. Chapter 19. The Family Question. Word of the Second Ring expedition traveled through Ashen Reach even faster than the Duskhound story had. And this time, nobody was laughing. Kael noticed the difference immediately. The way conversations in the market square shifted when he walked past. Curious now instead of dismissive, a few people who'd never said 2 words to him, suddenly finding reasons to say hello. Bryce noticed it too, and had the good sense, for once, to keep his distance, which Kael appreciated more than any apology would have. Leora he ran into outside the alchemist's supply shop, 3 days after getting back, both of them clearly startled by the encounter. She looked well, the blue shawl again, a little more travel-worn now, the confident set of someone whose gamble had mostly paid off. "I heard," she said, without quite meeting his eyes, "about the deep C rank. That's genuinely impressive, Kael. Thanks." An awkward silence stretched between them, neither one quite sure what the rules were anymore. "Garrick's doing well," she offered, eventually, like it might fill the gap. E-rank swordsman track. Capital Academy's expressed interest. Good for him. And Kael found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he meant it. Not warmly, not with any lingering affection, but with the flat, uncomplicated indifference of someone who had simply moved far enough past something that it no longer had any weight left to throw. "I hope it works out for both of you." Leora studied him for a moment, something unreadable crossing her face, not quite regret, but adjacent to it. "You've changed," she said. "Turns out I had somewhere to go," Kael said, and left it at that, and didn't look back to see her reaction. Because for the first time since the market stalls and the 11 silver he'd never see again, he genuinely didn't need to. The harder conversation happened that night, at the chapel, with Wren sitting cross-legged on his cot with her arms wrapped around her knees. Uncharacteristically quiet. "You're going to say yes eventually," she said, finally. "To the capital thing, aren't you?" "I don't know. You do, though. I've known you since we were 8, Kael. You already know. You're just being careful about saying it out loud because you think it'll hurt less if you ease into it." She wasn't looking at him, staring instead at old Scuttle, keeping its dented, patient watch from his windowsill. "I don't want you to go. I'm not going anywhere yet." Yet is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Kael didn't have a good answer for that, mostly because she was right, and they both knew it. He sat down next to her instead, close enough that their shoulders touched, and let the silence sit for a while before he tried again. "Whatever House Solari turns out to be," he said, slowly, working it out as he spoke. "Whatever they want, whoever I turn out to have been 15 years ago, that's not going to undo any of this. You, Fen, the chapel, this stupid town that laughed at me on the worst day of my life, and then quietly stuck around anyway." He nudged her shoulder with his. "If I ever do go to the capital, it's not instead of Ashen Reach. It's in addition to it. I promise you that much. Even if I can't promise you the rest yet." Wren was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice had gone thick in a way she clearly hoped he wouldn't notice. "You'd better mean that." "I mean it." "Good." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, fast, like she could outrun the fact that she'd needed to. "Because if you turn into some insufferable capital noble who forgets his friends, I will personally hunt you down with an army of badly named scrap machines, and I will win, because I taught you everything you know about being funny." "You taught me nothing about being funny." "Lies. Slander. I am your entire comedic foundation. And despite everything, the letter, the long watcher, the slow, unresolved weight of a question he genuinely didn't know how to answer yet." Kael found himself laughing, easy and real, for the first time in what felt like days. "For what it's worth, operator," Ashen said quietly, once Wren had finally drifted off to sleep on his cot, still curled around her knees. I do not have a great deal of experience with human attachment, but I would classify what you have here as worth protecting, regardless of what the capital turns out to want from you. Yeah, Kael said, into the dark, watching old Scuttle's five-legged shape settle on the windowsill. Yeah, I know. Chapter 20. The Trial of Will. It came without warning, the way Ashen had implied it eventually would. Not summoned, not requested, just there one evening, when Kael sat down at the scrapyard workbench and reached for the familiar thread of aether in his chest, and found, instead, something new waiting for him. System notification, threshold reached. Blueprint synthesis Tier 2. Machine communion Tier 2. C-rank combat data logged. Evolution trial available. Trial of will. This trial cannot be repeated if failed. Recommend operator proceed only when genuinely ready. Ashen. I see it. This is earlier than most archive fragments suggest is typical. Your combat exposure and aether growth rate have been unusually aggressive for a 3-month period. Is that good or bad? Both. Historically. Recommend proceeding carefully regardless. The trial, when he accepted it, didn't feel like a test in any way he recognized. There was no beast to fight, no puzzle to solve. The scrapyard around him seemed to fade, gently, into something dimmer and quieter, and in its place stood 4 shapes, vague, unfinished, like blueprints that hadn't decided what they wanted to be yet. An artificer's precise, articulated hands, a war machinist's weapon, half-forged, a golemancer's single massive silhouette, patient and still, a loose, scattered swarm of small shapes, moving together like a flock, finding its own rhythm. Choose, something said. Not quite ashen, older, colder, an echo from somewhere much further back than a scrapyard in Ashen reach. Or choose nothing, and remain as you are. Both are valid answers. Only one of them is honest about who you already are. Kael thought about it. Really thought about it. The way he thought about worn gear teeth and mismatched tooth counts, looking for the shape underneath the obvious answer. The artificer's precision was tempting. The golemancer's raw, single-minded power tempting in a different way. But he kept coming back, again and again, to the fight in the streambed. Not the arrow that had finished the Long Watcher, but the 12 crude, half-formed constructs he'd thrown out in desperation. Dozens of small, imperfect things working together toward one purpose, because one boy alone had never been enough. Not against a Duskhound pack, not against a C-rank beast, not against anything that had ever actually mattered. He thought about Scuttle, all 23 of them, badly named, individually replaceable, collectively the reason he was still alive. He reached toward the loose, scattered swarm shape, and it resolved, slowly, into something clearer. System notification, trial of will, provisional branch selected, drone sovereign, note. Full evolution requires further growth. This is a direction, not a destination. Class rank reassessed. Machinist, C rank, Tran C rank. Provisional evolution, drone sovereign, Tier 1. Data corrupted. Fragment legibility has improved fractionally with this selection. Partial render available. One mind, many hands, the remainder still unreadable. Recommend continued growth. Kael sat back from the workbench, breathing hard, the scrapyard slowly resolving back into itself around him. Ordinary and dim, and exactly as it had always been. Except for old Scuttle, which had climbed onto his knee at some point during the trial, and was sitting there with the smug stillness of a machine that had known the answer all along. Did it work? Yes. An operator. That partial fragment. I want to be honest with you, since honesty has generally served us well. A pause, longer than Ashen's usual clip delivery. I believe I now know, with reasonable confidence, What the corrupted title eventually says, I do not think you are ready to hear it, and I do not think hearing it early would help you become who you are about to become. I would ask you to trust me on this. Kael, exhausted, aching, more full of quiet certainty than he'd felt in his entire life, found that, for once, he could. Okay, he said. Then I guess we'd better get to work. He picked old Scuttle up off the windowsill on his way out, mostly out of habit, and didn't think much more about the corrupted fragment that night. There was a letter still sitting unanswered back at the chapel that he'd have to deal with eventually. There was a forest on the valley's edge that wasn't done with him yet, and probably never would be. And there was, right now, just an ordinary evening in an ordinary scrapyard, which, after everything, felt like exactly the right place to stop and catch his breath before whatever came next. Ashen, for its part, kept its one small secret a little longer and didn't say why. Chapter 21. The Reply. He wrote 7 drafts before he let Wren read any of them, and she vetoed all 7 within about a minute and a half. This one sounds like you're apologizing for existing, she said, tapping draft 4. This one, draft 6, reads like a guild incident report. And this one, draft 7, which Kael had been quietly proud of, opens with Dear House Solari, like they're a business you're filing a complaint against. They are kind of a business. They're your family, Kael, possibly. Write it like a person, not like Denner filling out a requisition form. In the end, with Halden's help, she'd offered, unprompted, to route the letter through official guild channels so it wouldn't get lost in whatever backlog a 15-year-old inquiry generated. He wrote something shorter and plainer than any of the drafts Wren had rejected. He was alive. He'd grown up well, safe, cared for, in a chapel in a town called Ashenreach. He wasn't ready to travel to the capital yet, but he wasn't refusing to, either. He would welcome a letter back when they were ready to send one. He didn't mention Ashen. He didn't mention the crater, or Fenn's math, or the particular ache of imagining a 15-year search finally landing on an actual answer. Some things, he decided, deserved to be said in person, if they ever got said at all. Good, Wren said, reading the final draft over his shoulder, and didn't offer a single joke about it, which told him more than any compliment could have. Bryce Calder's first real hunter assignment came through the same week, and Kael heard about it second-hand from Denner, who delivered the news with the specific weary satisfaction of a man watching a long-running problem become someone else's problem for a while. Joran's taking him and 2 other new E-ranks out on rotation, Denner said, scratching his neck. Farm patrol, mostly. Edge of the first ring. Low risk, good training. Kid's actually decent with a spear, whatever else you think of him. He paused. You 2 ever going to sort out whatever's between you? There's nothing to sort out. He's a bully who's mad I stopped being an easy target. Sure, Denner said, in the tone of a man who'd seen this particular dynamic resolve itself 100 different ways over the years, and suspected he already knew roughly how this one would go. You keep telling yourself that. Kael didn't think much more about it. He had a letter to finish worrying about. A swarm tactics drill Ashen wanted him running every evening, now that the drone sovereign path had opened up genuinely new options, and a scuttle count that had, against his own better judgment, crept up to 26. He would think about it a great deal more, very soon, when Bryce's farm patrol turned out to be standing in exactly the wrong place, at exactly the wrong time.